Perfect. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Let me just get my PowerPoint slideshow ready. How is everyone today? Thank you so much for joining me and myself and John on how consulting supercharges your business. I'm one of your hosts, Joy Neuhold. Oh, John, you're still
And
muted.
I'm finally unmuted. I'm Jon Neuhold, your other co-host. So for those of you who have not attended one of our training sessions or webinars, why don't we start a little bit about telling you about ourselves and our companies.
Yeah, absolutely. I actually started the Great Canadian Training and Consulting Company in 2002. You may have known us from our other name, JN Software Consulting. And I was the original trainer and consultant. And about 7 years ago, we acquired CompuEase and have been working in Ottawa and Quebec with CompuEase. These days, I am kept super busy with a very energetic 6-year-old. And as a family, we love to travel. And my personal fun fact is that I love adventure when I travel. So I've gone bobsledding in Lake Placid. I've gone canyoneering in Utah. I've gone whitewater rafting, and I love exploring ruins.
Excellent. And I'm John. I spent the first 3 years watching Joy succeeding and building her company from the ground up, and I decided to join at that point. I spent a lot of time initially doing Excel training and Access training. Eventually, I moved on to a lot of Access development, so building databases and things for clients. More recently, I've spent more time in helping develop businesses themselves, helping support CompuEase with its training facility in Ottawa. And my fun fact is that I leverage my Excel skills to dominate fantasy hockey.
Perfect. So in today's webinar, we use RingCentral, which is actually Zoom, but on the RingCentral platform. So as we go through the webinar, if you have any questions, please put them in the chat window that's in the bottom right. We have Melanie with us today on technical support, and she'll keep all the lines muted. But if you have any technical issues, you can message Melanie and she'll help you out. And then within 24 hours, we always post our webinars and send all our everyone who signed up a copy of it if they want to watch it later. So just very briefly, because many people usually know Great Canadian Training or CompuEase. So who are these two companies? They're actually sister companies. Great Canadian Training provides training all across Canada and North America and consulting services and application development services. CompuEase does training and has a training facility in Ottawa and Quebec. And really what we feel makes these two companies really special is we have very, very responsive, high quality customer service, and all our consultants are very highly skilled and they have real business experience. So
now the information we're going to share with you today about consulting does apply to all different types of consulting. And so it's really general principles to look out for. But the specific types of consulting that we do are often centered around software consulting, so helping you with your Microsoft suite, Adobe, other types of software like that, as well as the application development side of software, perhaps web-based databases, Access databases, so on and so forth. And then on the professional skills, the soft skills side of things, there's coaching and consulting, helping develop processes and tools for you to implement those kinds of things.
So then today, in today's webinar, we're going to talk about what consulting is, when you should consider it, the benefits of it, areas consulting is a really good fit, how to start your project before you even start looking for a consultant, how to make sure your consultant's the right fit, and then things to look out for when you're getting quotes. So to start, what is consulting? And so when we were putting this webinar together, you know, I kind of really thought about it. And consulting, you know, you could look up YouTube videos and almost find joke videos where the consultant's using buzzwords around a conference table and the employees are trying to figure out like what this person does. I thought, you know, I could do a Webster's dictionary definition. Webster's dictionary defines consulting as this, but in the context of this webinar, really consulting is filling a gap. So there's something missing within your organization that you cannot fill, and so therefore you need a consultant.
And you're going to recognize those gaps as times to find consultants anytime it doesn't make sense to hire a full-time employee to do something. So if your current staff lack a specific skill set or lack the time required to execute a project, perhaps a project is too small, perhaps it's infrequent, it's one time, requiring a new full-time employee doesn't make sense for that. Learning an entire new way of doing things or an entire piece of software to do such a small thing doesn't make sense for that. A consultant is a good option. It's also possible the project is too big. It could be too big in size, it could be too big in scope, or it could be too big in requiring a variety of different skill sets to be solved by existing or new employees. You might have to create an entire new department to be able to take on a task. Well, why go to all that effort when you can have an external company that's already set up with all the appropriate people in those positions handle that for you? So let's talk about some examples here. You could have a one-off project. This is something like you've been asked to create a Visio diagram, but you've never used Visio before. Or perhaps you realize that you need to create a template in Word for something, but you've never done that before. Maybe you have an Excel file that you're using and it's just not automated enough. And you realize, oh, I've heard of these things called macros that can do some things automatically. If I had a few of these in here, could solve that. But I don't have the time or the knowledge to learn and figure out those things on my own. Maybe I can approach a consultant who can handle that for me. We look at an example here. We have a client that comes back to us for a number of different one-off projects that's in the paper products industry. So they receive all this sales data from a part of their company, and they want to be able to create reporting from it so that their sales teams can see how things are performing. But they lack the technical skill and the time to execute that plan. They're able to get it to a certain point in Excel, but they want it to get to this final finished point, and so they approach us and say, okay, these are our final goals. Can you help us get to that? And then, of course, along the way, we're also able to share our ideas on how they can improve those goals as well. Another example would be a situation where you have to make some type of decision. A consultant may have more expertise in the area that you're deciding. Maybe you're making a decision on what type of software to use for something. Maybe you're making a decision about how to go about implementing something in your organization. This is information that you can get from a consultant to help you make a decision that you don't have the knowledge base in to fully understand all the different potential variables. You still get to make that final decision, but you're drawing on the talents of other people to be able to help you with that.
So a good example is we have a client in the childcare industry. They created childcare software. For years, I was their trainer. And then the software kind of reached a point where it was very dated. So they kind of brought me in to kind of basically produce a report for them that said, what were they doing well? What need to be improved? What were even like the industry standards that the software should be up to? Another example is, you might say, in soft skills consulting, we have a client in the medical field, and they had actually originally contacted us to do some custom soft skills training. But as we kind of went through the process with them, we realized we actually had to develop some testing for their potential new hires. It told them all kinds of information. They decided it was best that if a third party, right, an outside company, which is us, administered the test and provided the test results for them. It provided the service that they needed. And then they were able to fill one of their gaps where, instead of having us come in and do custom soft skills training, it made more sense that they hired a full-time person that was going to come in, develop all the training, administer it, tweak it kind of as needed. And then on the soft skills consulting side, sorry about that, soft skills coaching side, we're taking soft skills principles and then helping you apply them to a real life situation. So for example, we had someone in the banking industry. They were a leader in the banking industry, and they just were not connecting with the people that she was leading. So going through the whole process of coaching, they came to the realization that she was dismissing things that were really important to the people that she led, and it led to this like disconnect between them. And so then they worked through the process to learn how to collaborate more so they could be more creative, and it built a lot more trust. And so on the soft skills side of things, we're not giving answers because there isn't necessarily a specific yes or no answer, but we're working through the challenge with you and working out what challenges you're having, what goals do we want to reach, how do we get there, and then bringing in another perspective.
Let's talk about some of the benefits of consulting. So first of all, there's the expertise that you gain. You are a better expert at whatever your industry is than a consultant would be. But the consultant has more expertise in this specific slice of detailed information, whether it's about Excel or whether it's about how to apply a certain soft skill, because they do that all the time. So they're able to bring their expertise and their best practices to help you apply that in your industry. You also get fresh perspectives on a project. You know more about that industry, but this consultant has dealt with people in a variety of different industries. And so they're able to hear a variety of different perspectives and be able to share those ideas with you, which you may be able to benefit from in your company. Let's look at an example. So dealing with a company that has, a consulting company that has a variety of different expertise means getting better options. We had a delivery company approach us to help automate some of their billing processes. Now, there were a number of directions that this project could have gone. We're dealing with data here. It could have been an online database. It could have been an Access database. It could have been a SQL database. But after consulting with us, it was determined that the best direction was to just add a few helpful macros into an Excel workbook, and that was able to generate the required reports they needed. Now, if they had approached a company that understood just one thing, like say web databases, they probably would have been presented with only one option, because to a hammer, every problem is a nail. When dealing with a consulting company that has expertise in a variety of different types of consulting and also a variety of different types of industries, we're able to get different perspectives and different expertise to help make the best decisions and complete your project in the best way.
And so there can also be financial benefits. So sometimes initially when you hear the hourly rate or the cost of doing the project, it may seem really high. But then if you think long term, what would that cost be if I hired an employee, had to train them before they could even start on the project? And then let's say the project finishes, do you still have that employee? Maybe with a consulting company, you're only paying for the support that you need after the project's done.
Consulting works in different ways with different types of organizations. So usually with small to medium-sized businesses, we get a lot of requests to help automate processes. Your organization has a certain way of doing things, and there's no software out there that does it exactly the way that you do. So it's either conform yourself to the way that works, or figure out how to do things on your own. Figuring out how to do things on your own usually means some type of manual processes. And that's where consulting can come in handy, because we can help you automate some of those processes, implement certain technologies that make things easier, make things faster. Again, these can be databases, these can be templates, these can be macros in Excel. All of these kinds of things help improve accuracy, but also save time. It's really hard for a company to grow if everything you do is some type of manual process, because it increases the amount of staff you need as you expand. If every time you take on a new sale and make a big sale, you have to bring on more people to help care for that, it's going to be really hard to grow, because you end up kind of maxing out on that at some point. Automating processes is a very effective way for small and medium businesses to grow effectively. When it comes to corporations, they usually approach us from a number of different directions. Sometimes they approach us from a higher level. So corporations will have someone like, say, a CFO, right? In Joy's medical company project example that she gave, it was the CFO that engaged us, that wanted the new hire testing. They realized they didn't have an internal department that addressed the issue, and that it was easier to outsource that to a different organization. However, a lot of corporate interactions we get are at a lower level. In some type of specific department, lower down in a company, even sometimes just like a regional division of a global organization, they're not getting the support from the rest of the company that they need. Perhaps it's a sales team and they need better spreadsheets to organize their sales plans. Or perhaps someone is given a bunch of data, but not the support or tools to make use of it. In any department, this could happen to, even one that just needs some Outlook templates created or documents created. They're given these assignments and responsibilities, but they're not given the support necessary to carry it out. And so they search out outside organizations to be able to fill those gaps.
Yeah, and another area is government agencies and associations. So a lot of times these types of organizations are given a mandate. So that's an order or a commission to do something. They could be given the responsibility to track something, but not given the system or the tools to do it. So in these cases, we've created spreadsheets, templates, systems for automation and tracking. And then sometimes it's not just a department or a higher level employee asking. You could also be supporting the individual, and their level is supporting the system, supporting and managing the system. So consulting, this sounds kind of funny, but consulting can basically be whatever you need it to be. So it could be as simple as creating some documents and files. Maybe you need proper processes written down in documentation. It could be partial creation. We've been engaged many times where a client could be partially through a project and realize, wait a second, we need to know the best practices. We need someone's expertise. An employee left and we need help supporting this. Filling in gaps, right, which we've already talked about. And then part of it could also be custom training. So maybe something's been developed for them, but then the employees using it actually need training on how to use this tool. And then there can also be like another level of training sometimes where there will be, instead of that whole group of people needing training to use the tool, you have another level of maybe just a few people that need more admin or advanced training because they're going to somewhat maintain or support what's been developed for them. So a good example I have is someone in the food industry approached us and they needed a SharePoint site. And so we have proposed for their head office, we do a SharePoint site. For the franchisees, they actually have a sub-site. The employees at the head office would be trained on using the site and supporting the sub-site. There was another level, right, the admin level of just like maybe 2 people that would need admin training. And then there was going to be full documentation onto how the sites were set up, organized, how they would maintain them and make changes to them. And then this is one of my favorite parts when the client is also involved in the process. And they said, you know what, it would be a really good exercise then for the employees at the head office to then train the franchisees on how to use their portion of the site and create training videos for them. And so this is really good because sometimes, you know, the client is doing pieces and components of it also. So then that kind of leads us down to how to start your project before you're actually engaging and looking at consultants. So when you're working on a small project, the first question you always want to say is who's going to be using this or who needs this? What are their roles? What do you want to accomplish? So what is the challenge you're having? What do you want to be able to do? And then the last thing, which is something I say in all initial meetings, do you have any samples you can show us? Like, could there be things internally in your company that other departments are using? Could there be other things that you've seen? If there's confidential information, can you strip out anything confidential and let us see a copy of it? Could we sign a confidentiality agreement? But anytime you can show us things that you like or don't like is always a really good starting point. You're muted again, John.
We have an excellent blog post on our website, which we'll link to as well, which deals with larger projects, the types of questions that you should ask yourself before looking for a consultant. One category question is who, right? Who is going to be using the end result of this? Maybe this is a one-off kind of thing. Maybe it's an entire database being built or whatever the project is. You can still ask who's going to be using it. Are they all going to be using it in the same way? Or are there going to be different ways in which they're using it? For example, with a database, you can say, well, not everyone needs to be able to edit this, or not everyone needs to be able to view that. You need to make these kinds of decisions before the project starts. Then it's the what. What will the database accomplish, right? What existing processes are being replaced by this? And if you can prepare as many samples as possible, that's going to help your consultant when you approach them. And can you create mock-ups of the end results of what you actually want? And then, of course, you should consider, if you're a large organization, what other departments in my company might benefit from this, or what other directions can this information or data flow that it can benefit from. And then there's the where, right? Especially if it's a database, where are the users going to be located? Because if it's one person sitting at one computer, your technology options are very different than if it's many users spread across the entire country. And you want to address the when. When do you want this project finished? When do you need this project finished? Which are two different questions. And also, what are your company growth plans? If this is more than just a one-off thing, where are you going to be a year from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now? Is whatever you're creating going to have to change and be dynamic over time to adjust to that?
Can I jump in with an example?
Absolutely.
We had a client approach us to build a database, and it was filling the gap between two very large systems. And really, they had new software coming in that should fix that problem, but it wasn't going to happen for 2 years. So that was part of the discussion when we planned out their database. How long, right, was this database going to be? It was supposed to be 2 years. In that time, the company was bought out by another company. They then replaced it with another piece of software. So they ended up using that solution for 7 years. So it was still designed in a good way that they could actually use it past when they were planning. Sorry, John, did you have
Excellent. That brings us on to soft skills coaching.
Okay, perfect. So on the soft skills coaching and consulting side, you're going to ask questions, or when you talk to us, we're going to say things like, what do you want to see changed? What are you currently struggling with? What's happening that, this change isn't happening? And you can kind of liken it to if you went to talk to a personal trainer, you usually have a starting point or something in mind. I want to lose 10 pounds. I want to lose some weight. I want to have a healthier lifestyle. And so that gives you a starting point to start setting goals, to figure out why it's not happening. And so if we relate it to that leader in the banking industry, they might approach us and say, I want to be able to connect better with my employees. I want to be able to coach them better.
So you've identified your project. Now you go out and try and find consultants to help fill that gap. So what are the questions you should ask while you're in that process? So first of all, this is a multiple quote situation. You should always get the quotes from multiple different consultants, because even if you really like the first person you talk to, you may end up going with them. But there's no harm in getting the perspective of others on it and confirm that what you're doing is the right direction for you. When you're actually talking to these consultants and getting quotes from them, you want to establish things like, how long have they been in business? Someone new may be cheaper, but you do have to make sure that they have the experience you need to complete the project. Can they actually do the whole project? Are they only experienced in really doing a part of the project? Are they going to be able to support you after the project? If they were not around 3 years ago, can you be confident that they're going to be here 3 years from now when you need to be making updates to your project, or you need to be making changes to a database as your business changes? We've inherited a lot of projects over the years because someone's brother's nephew built something a few years ago and isn't around to make any modifications to it anymore. You also want to establish who you're going to be dealing with at the consulting company. If it's a larger consulting company, your interactions up to this point may have only been with some type of salesperson. So if you're dealing with that salesperson, can you meet with the people who will be working on your project? Do they assign a project manager? Can you meet with that project manager before you do that? Can you meet with the programmers who are going to be working on it? If it's just a one-man show, you've only been dealing with the consultant, the developer directly during this process. So you then want to make sure that they have enough business experience to translate your business processes into a system that actually works for you, because they're not going to be able to draw on multiple people at their company to complete the project. They kind of have to have all the information, the skill set internally themselves. So you're going to want to establish that they can actually do that. It's also good to think about how much time they spend with you during the quoting process. How much time do they spend learning about your business and the needs of your business before they give you a quote? Are you confident that they've not overquoted or underquoted? Both are a problem. The underquoting sounds good for you, but it's actually the last thing you want, because then you end up with an angry consultant or an angry developer who's rushing to finish off a project that they realize they're not making enough money on. Overquoting is a function of them not spending enough time learning about your needs. So they end up padding their quote to try and cover themselves, so that they're really just guessing on the quote, and you don't want to have to pay for that extra padding. You can only go into so much detail in a quoting process. For example, in a database, you can't establish the exact name of every single field that shows up on every single screen. But the quoting process should include a general idea of what are all the screens going to be? What are all the reports that you need coming out of this? What are all the data inputs that are coming into it? They need to take the time to learn all those things so that the quote they give makes some type of accurate sense. And they're not just padding it out, hoping you'll go with them, and they'll figure out how to complete it at the end of the day, and they don't have to worry about it because they quoted so high. Doesn't matter. You don't want that. You want them to make an accurate quote. You also want the quote to discuss what's in the scope of the project, and if something turns out to be outside the scope that you discover afterwards, well, how's that going to be handled? Make sure stuff is as clearly defined in the quote as possible as to what the end products will be. It's going to result in this, that, and the other thing, and that's what you're going to get back at the end of the day. So we also want to talk about what their development process is like. So what is their process for making minor adjustments as it goes along? Are there testing phases where they send things back to you and they make changes? Do they put a limit on how many changes you can make? Is it a time period? So on and so forth. Really what you want to establish is at what point in the process do you actually get to see something? Because you don't want to have something fully created, they show it to you, and you go, that is completely not my vision or what I was expecting. If it's some type of one-off project where they want to make some type of document for you, well, the document should look and feel like your company branding or like the way you sketch out. And you want to have points throughout the entire process where you can see that and see that they're on the right path. If it's some type of database, you want to be able to test it. Make sure that A, it's working, so clearly these people know what they're doing, and B, it's doing the kinds of things you want to do, and you can see it progressing to the end state and give your feedback on it. A lot of things, and that's again why you can't in the quoting process necessarily identify every single field that will be in every single screen. Some things don't become apparent until it actually starts being developed, and you have to be flexible to make those changes as that time goes along. So you need to understand what their process is to be flexible with those kinds of things. You also want to establish the support options they offer. So if it isn't listed in their quote, make sure you ask. What happens a day after they deploy it and you discover something's not working? What happens a month after? What happens a year after? There's nothing wrong with them charging for some type of fix a year down the road, but you need to know that. You need to know that that is a fix that needs to be something, how they're going to address that fix, right? You may end up in a situation where there's a rare bug that only shows up after a year. Well, how is that going to be addressed? And then how easy is it to address that? How easy is it to make modifications after deployment, right? Will it take them weeks to deploy the changes you want? Is the database in some type of locked state? Even Excel files can be delivered with password protection on it that prevent you from modifying it. And some companies use this as a way of trapping you into working with them forever. And this can also apply to SharePoint sites, Power BI reporting, a lot of different things where it can be done in such a proprietary way that you're kind of forced to work with them afterwards. You want to establish that along with the rights of it. You may think it seems obvious that just because you've paid for something that you own it and can do whatever you want with it, but there's actually a variety of complex copyright laws around the development of programming code and other things, where just because you've paid for it doesn't mean you have the full rights to that work. So you want to understand what their copyright situation is with that work.
And then when you're going through the quoting process and meeting with consultants and companies and stuff, things to look out for or to do. So I would say if you're working on a smaller project, you could ask the consultant or the company, do you have some examples you can show us? I'm sure they can provide examples with confidential information removed from it. If you're working on a much larger project or long-term project, you may ask for references of similar projects, because everything is custom. Nothing's going to be exactly the same, but they should be able to provide similar type projects that they've worked on. And on the soft skills side, I would say you could ask for testimonials of work that they've done from previous clients. And then you can ask them things like, would you be a good fit for this project? And if the consultant or the company that you're considering engaging does think they're a good fit, they will tell you. They'll know exactly why they'll be a good fit for you. There's nothing wrong with asking, because you're almost interviewing them. What experience do you have that would make them a good fit, or you or your consultants have? What qualifies you to do this project? Have you worked in this field before? And that's always an interesting project, because maybe they haven't worked in this field before, but they could give you examples as to why, even though I haven't been in this exact field, you know, the principles are still very similar that I would apply here. Or they may be able to give you some examples of similar types of clients or industries that they have been in. And then my advice on the client side would be to always just be really honest with the consultant, right? Where are you in the process? Are you someone in a company that says, okay, there's a really big problem or gap here, and so you're doing all the research to present it to your boss, and your boss is going to say yes or no? Are you planning out a really big project, but it wouldn't start for at least 1 or 2 quarters, because then after you figure this all out, you kind of have to plan for the budget to do it? The next thing I would say is, what are your expectations on this project? I would share with the consultant, because they will either be completely on board or they will not be, and they'll share that with you. Be open about the budget you have in mind. There's nothing like going through the whole entire process and then the person is quadruple the cost that you had in mind, but you know, at least you kind of know before you get to the end part of this process. Do you have a timeline in mind? Maybe the consultant's not available for 3 months and this has to be done by that time. Let them know, are you getting competitive quotes? Clients tell me that all the time, and I say, that's fantastic. I think that's good, because then you'll end up being really comfortable with whoever you pick. You know, make sure you ask them all these questions, which are basically the things we're sharing with you today. And then I would also, too, in certain industries, right, if a project's big enough, it's going to go out to bid. So I just be realistic, saying, you know what, this ended up being a really big project. We're going to actually put it out to bid. We'd like you to participate. And then at that point, the consultants can say whether or not they're interested in bidding. And then just sometimes, are there aspects of this project that are just not negotiable for you? So I have been in meetings where the client says, is not an option. The consultant cannot work virtually. They have to be in my office every day working on it, right? And that may determine who you end up with. You might say, you know what, this project's so important, it has to be done by, let's say, the end of the year. And I think that's good, because what if they're not available to do it? What if they can't do it? And then another really common one is, obviously a lot of things are driven by budget. Being just really honest, I cannot go past this budget, and it just may not be a realistic fit. So then I would just say, you know, consultants are definitely not the same. And even if you engaged in a couple of quotes, sorry, give me 1 second. There we go. Even if you engage and get different quotes and talk to different consultants, you're going to see what they're able to offer is going to completely vary. Maybe if you are talking more with an individual consultant, maybe there's only components of your project that they can do, and that may be good, and it may not be good, right? If you work with a company, they may be able to do all the components of it. Their skill sets may completely vary. Their recommendations on how to do your project may completely vary, and one may really speak to you and another one may not. Another good example too is, do they have the skill set? So if you need to install software and set up some kind of software solution, does that consultant have the skill set to provide the information that your IT department or your IT person needs to set up the software? Can they tell them what software they have to set up, what versions? I had a project recently and it was a really big company. It was easier because our thing was just way outside the skill set of IT, that they basically gave us full access. We explained in very great detail what we were doing, but it was easier to engage us to set up the whole entire thing and test it with them, educate IT on how it was set up and what they could and couldn't do specifically in that server, right? Can your consultant help you with those things? And then, of course, I think everyone's in full agreement, price can completely wildly vary. And so is that a budget that makes sense to you? Is it all included? If it's not included, how are you told this was outside your scope? How will you be billed for it? Just so everyone's kind of on the same page. And so that kind of leads us to how, I'm just gonna share a couple of things of where I think we're a little bit different, or maybe more kind of what we offer. So when people are initially starting these projects or kind of thinking about them, we offer a free training and consulting audit. If you very much only want to talk about a database, or you inherited a project you want to talk about, we offer free consultations. So with the training and consulting audit, we try to keep it really simple because we know people are just really busy, but basically we would just book a 20-minute conversation with you. You can explain all, the challenges and the gaps and the strengths and stuff you had, and then we basically compile a report for you. And here, give me 1 second. And so you can you can access that on our website under free resources. We have our training and consulting audit. If you were working on a database and you were on our site, you'll see there's a form where you can, and same on the consulting page, where you can book a free evaluation. We're happy to talk through everything with you, give you all our advice that if you are going to go get quotes, all the different things to ask that are really important. And then when we do our projects, whether large or small, you're actually always assigned a project manager. So in some cases where it's appropriate, you work directly with the consultant. You may never see your project manager, but they're always checking in, making sure things are being done on time. We check in with the client. Is the client happy? Are we hitting the timeline? Are we hitting the testing and everything that you need? And so we feel that's one thing that kind of makes us unique. I want to also move you to, we have a free resource section on our webpage. And so besides the training and consulting audit, obviously you guys know about our webinars because you're attending today, but we have many, many more topics coming up. Everything, and the topics do vary. So, we have one coming up next month on how to organize training if you're part of an association. With one of our partners in June, we're going to talk about their working smart theory, productivity training. We have lots of technical stuff coming out, from Teams to Power Query, dashboards and data visualization. Sorry, I didn't say that properly. Power Pivot. We even have soft skills coming up, tough conversations don't get easier, but you can get better. More teams. So we're going to talk about teams, to-do and planner, and how they kind of work in teams. We have more topics coming out, and we have even more free resources coming out. I encourage you to go to our blog. When Melanie sends out the email with the recording, we'll make sure she sends links to all our database and consulting blog posts. But, we provide a lot of information to help you, the client, plan and figure out and ask all the right questions. We also have things like free downloads here for like accessibility ribbon that you can download and install to make all your documents and spreadsheets accessible. So we have lots of free resources to share. I'm going to move that out of the way. And then I was going to say, I believe we are on to questions. Does anyone have any questions?
I see some questions in the chat here, Joy. Can you share more examples of projects you have done?
Yes. Sorry. Yes, we can share more examples. Okay. How about, on our website here, I'm going to go here. On our website, we do have under databases, actually, I'll go to consulting first. So, I mean, consulting isn't always a small project, but we'll say on these one-off or smaller projects, we have put up examples of stuff that we have worked on. So one time I had a client approach me and say, you know what, we want to surprise our company. We want you to make a yearbook in Word. They supplied all the pictures. We made them a template and we designed the whole thing for them. I have a good example of, just a second. Yeah, I had a good example of a company where they had bought accounting software, but there were parts of the software they were allowed to kind of create their own modules. So they brought us in to create all the documentation, and it was designed in a really specific way because they were internally then going to design their own virtual training for their employees. So again, we sometimes we're only filling like a little gap or a component of something that's missing. We're not necessarily always doing the whole project. I was engaged by a consulting firm who said, you know what, we have a questionnaire that we need filled out before we meet with our clients. And in this case, it was really specific to them. We decided on creating a form in Word. The fields were locked, so they were kind of shifted through the form to fill it out and was submitted to them because at that time he felt, okay, everyone has Microsoft Word. If I were to do a project like that now, I mean, there are so many tools from SurveyMonkey if you had like high volume. You could do Microsoft Forms because then there's a whole back-end way to see the data. There's even like fillable PDFs that you could create, and they don't necessarily have to have the software to do it. So, I mean, there's many ways to do stuff like that. How about, John, let's flip over to the database side.
Yeah,
Because
so we have some examples here. So for example, the contract management database example.
There we go. Yeah.
This is a company that resells other vendor products to their customers. So they have all these different vendors and they have these contracts with these vendors for how much they get paid kind of as commission or how much they remit back to the vendor whenever a sale gets made. And each of these contracts is extremely detailed, pages and pages of very specific, this specific product gets this much, but not for this customer. And if it's this customer, it's this much. And this other thing starts at this specific date and it changes. And then there's different categories. I think if it's sold under this category of good, the same good is sold under this program, it's this much, but if it's under a different program, it's something else. And they were tracking all of this in Microsoft Word, which was okay for actually printing out and signing the contracts, but was completely useless from an actual internal use perspective where all their people across the country need to be able to look up these contracts to be able to determine how much money was being remitted and where. So they started by someone in their organization saying, oh, I know how to use Access. I can create a database to track this. And that person got about halfway through that process and realized, you know what, A, this isn't my full-time job to create this database, and B, I could use a little bit more expertise to actually do this properly. I'm kind of stuck. I don't really know where to go next. So they approached us, and we helped them design a database that's now able to be used around the country by all the different members of their organization. They've been using that for years. One of the interesting things we did with this project from a consulting perspective was to be able to bring in our expertise of how to best use these programs. They understood that Access could be used by multiple users. You put the data on a shared drive and everyone else kind of connects to that data and it works. And it always looks like it works great for that person who's trying it out because they're doing it on their local network. What a lot of people don't realize is that when you try and deploy that concept to the rest of your organization around the country, even though those people have access to those same shared drives, the internet doesn't communicate that information properly. Access isn't designed to transfer that information over the internet as well as it is over a local network. So it actually creates an extremely slow database. So we had to come up with a way, okay, they want to have all these remote users using it. How do we create a system that is actually responsive and fast for them? often in this kind of circumstance, you'd be presented with options like, oh, well, you better create an online database for that, or you better create like a SQL Server backend or a cloud database backend. You can still use Access as the front end, but you need this backend to be able to manage all that data and spread it around the internet properly. However, during the needs analysis process, we realized that these remote users didn't actually need to make any changes to the data. They just need to be able to read the data, to view the data, and that this data changed on a regular basis, but not to the point where a user needed to see the changes that happened 1 second ago or 1 minute ago or 1 hour ago. Seeing the changes made on a daily basis were perfectly fine for their use case. So instead of developing some type of expensive online database or expansive project, we simply modified their existing plan to use Access and said, what we'll do is every day have it automatically copy the entire database to those local users, and then they could use that file locally so that it was fast and responsive. They got their updated data on the basis that they needed it, and they were able to use the database quickly. And so that was a very effective solution to an otherwise complicated problem that it's difficult for someone who doesn't have as much experience with that type of software to come up with. You wanted to talk about the web order management. I think we talked about, which one were you talking about earlier with me, Joy? You like the HR web database project?
Yeah, so that was actually a client. We had built an Access database for someone else in their company, and so we referred to this person. And so I think initially having the conversation, we assumed it was going to be an Access database, but then when we kind of started talking about it, a web application kind of made more sense for them. And for them, they had very specific or very unique HR information they wanted to track. So all the forms were filled out or set up in a way that made sense for the main person using it and the other people accessing it. And then theirs even had like a reminder system. So then when you first logged into the dashboard, you'd have lists of stuff that maybe you had to collect from various employees or things you had to deal with the government and stuff. And so it was very automated because as they were growing, they needed some sort of system to put this in. I will also talk about this web order management system because this was actually a really good example where it was probably a smaller to medium-sized company. He actually approached me and he was like, if I do not build some kind of order management system, I actually am at this point turning away orders. So they would deliver for construction loads of stuff. So I mean, the driver could go to the same client throughout the whole entire day, bringing loads of all kinds of stuff, or they could have different loads throughout the day. And there was really specific billing information, there was really specific instruction information, and they just kind of reached this point where it could no longer be manually tracked with admin staff. It had to be automated. The drivers need to put in information, they need to get it a certain way, and they need to track things.
We have another question here, Joy.
Sure.
You talked about learning the consultant's processes. What are your processes?
It's a fantastic question. So I would actually say, John, I think for databases and consulting, the processes are similar because in the beginning, you're always having a conversation to figure out like, what is the challenge or and what do you want to accomplish? So on our consulting page, we actually talk about what our process is, right? And I think it's really important to sit and identify your needs. Now, if it was a really small project, I mean, you might go through multiple steps in one meeting. And if it's a bigger project, sometimes the client is going back and finding the information that they need for this project. John, I think you had a recent one for, I think they were going to build a web application and they actually had to go back for several weeks and kind of compile the information that they would need in this system.
I also had one where they said, okay, we have a deadline for this project and it was relatively soon. They're like, but we're still in the, deciding phase and analyzing phase about who to go with and what to do. And I'm like, great. If you want to meet that deadline, you can do that, but you also need to simultaneously start doing the next step, right? Which is figuring out what data you need to track and what actually being more detailed than it would be when I talked about how the quoting process works, right? Not just identifying what screens you want, but start making the lists of all the fields you want on those screens. Because if you want to meet that deadline, the moment you pick your consultant that you're going with, you're going to need to hit the ground running. You can't afford to have like a 3-week process of writing all that stuff out.
So that's actually an interesting thing, is sometimes in these projects, you can be on multiple steps at the same time. So once kind of your needs are identified, we figure out kind of what you want to do. And as we said, sometimes clients have approached us for training. I had a recent one where they approached us. They were thinking of consulting and maybe just a little bit of help on how to use a system because the employee had left the organization. And it turned out we set them up for 3 days of very intense training from one of our partners. And then it was left because they learned all the basics of how to support themselves. That later on, if they went to do something and then they needed help, they could engage us on a consulting level. So sometimes it takes a little while to figure out what the needs are and the different options. We work with you to develop a plan. And when we put out proposals, it'll say, you know, we need these, you know, this many weeks for this part. This part will take so long, but they're not we don't assign dates to them yet until a client decides to go ahead. Because then at that point, you might say, okay, some of your staff's going to be on vacation during these weeks. Okay, well then that bumps this down a little bit because, you know, they would have been testing otherwise, right? So then we assign actual dates to when we should do your project. And then, and then even in that development plan, you're also having, if it's a bigger project, when are you checking in? When are people going to start testing? When are you giving your feedback? Because as John said, you want to be giving your feedback at the very end. You want to know right away if something's not quite right, or needs to be tweaked, or, oh, we forgot, we have to track this one thing, we forgot about it, right? And then we work through your project. And then again, on bigger projects, once it's kind of completed, then there is a support period where it's going in and testing. We're saying, hey, we forgot this field, we forgot this little thing to track. And then, you know, it's also getting it onto your system for you to use.
And there's a couple different phases in those steps there. Because again, we want to be able to show you what we're working on as we're doing it so you can give your feedback. So we want to get something up on the screen as quickly as possible. If it's a database, let's get some screens up and you can see what they look like. We can get you a copy of the file so you can start testing it out. If it's a Word document, okay, well, let's send you the first few pages that we've worked on. Is this looking the way that it wants? Or maybe the document contains the same type of thing, like copied multiple times, right? Like the yearbook, for example, would have similar pages for different things. Well, let's create that template of what that is going to look like, get you to approve that portion of it, and then we can implement copying that for the rest of it.
Well, and that's also a good point too, is through that process, you're also finding either challenges that you know, no one would have ever thought of in the beginning, or, hey, we found a whole bunch of exceptions, how are we going to deal with them? So sometimes, yeah, kind of as you're working through like that yearbook project was actually a really good example where the quality of the pictures was not quite right and it didn't look right. So we actually went back to the client, we had a conversation of a whole bunch of things on their side they could do to improve the picture quality, and then how we could edit it on our side so that they looked a lot more uniform and stuff, right? So there wasn't a challenge I would never have guessed in the beginning, but as we went through, we started to find it. And then again, there's always exceptions that usually have to be worked through. So whether something has to be adapted for it or we change the process a little bit.
I think that's it for the questions, Joy.
Okay, everyone, I want to say thank you so much for joining us today. Clearly, you can tell John and I have a lot of passion for this, and we've been doing it for a long time. We're always so happy to share the information we know. If you ever have any questions or concerns, here's our contact information, and we'll be sure to make sure Melanie not only sends out a copy of the video, but links to the blog articles related to consulting and databases. So thank you, everyone, and have a fantastic day. Bye.